Hi, welcome back to part 2 of the How to Build Your Morningside Lights Lantern video. If you haven't seen part 1, we suggest that you start from there, and that will show you all the steps that you had to go through to get to this point. Just click the link in the description. So in this video, we're going to show you the next steps of the process, how to cover this with paper mache and color, and how to get the light in there and to raise it up on a pole. Just remember, we really want to see your work in progress, so check in with us. Send us some videos, some stills. We want to see what you're doing. And don't forget that we'll have 4 Zoom sessions where we can all gather if, since we can't be on the stage at Miller Theater, we can at least have some of those great conversations and we can give you some guidance over the Zoom and help you move through this process even as you share your work with your fellow Morningside Lights participants.
So I have my bucket that we used for the cheesecloth that has a little bit of Elmer's glue and water in it already. Just gonna gently open my box of art paste. We will need to add a gallon of water for the entire packet. So I'm gonna need 2 of these. Here's my second half gallon. Massaging the bag so that the powder comes out in a slow trickle while I beat it with a whisk. And take your time with this. I mean, it can take quite some time if you've got an electric, the electric egg beater. You maybe can do that, but this works fine. You just have to do it slowly so that you don't end up with big, thick blobs of paper mache paste. So once your paper mache is mixed, you want to let it sit for maybe 15, 20 minutes, and you'll see it'll start to thicken up. So at this phase, we're going to work only with the white tissue paper. It's helpful to pre-tear it so that when you start working on applying it to the lantern, you have it ready in manageable size. Paper has a grain. There's a direction that it likes to tear in and a direction where it kind of tends to tear jaggedly. This paper will want to tear this way. And if it's a little bit uneven, that's totally fine. And it is better to tear than to cut with your scissors. Sort of torn edges end up making stronger paper mache. Tear it into sort of largish squares, rectangles. My glue has been resting for 15, 20 minutes. I'm going to dip my brush, keep it pretty wet, but I might stop it from dribbling all over my work surface. The cheesecloth, where you put the glue is stiff, so it's a nice surface to paint the glue onto. And I'm putting a little bit of force. I'm sort of being a little rough with the brush, and I'm getting into the weave. And I'll do the cheesecloth edge, but also the sides. And then what I want to do is take one piece at a time. I want to make sure it's not 2 pieces stuck together, which is easy to do. Lay it on any part where I have put the glue at the base, and then, nice and smooth. I'll put my brush over it. Make sure that the tissue paper is totally adhered to the cheesecloth. Go over the edge. I'm gonna put this next piece and sort of cover half of the piece that I just put on. So really, as you go, you're gonna kind of overlap your pieces. And then I'm gonna take a third piece. I'm gonna start going in the opposite direction, but for that I need to apply some fresh glue. So one thing that's key is to avoid air bubbles. And the way to do that is to ensure that the cheesecloth, that the base layer is well glued. If there isn't a good layer of glue underneath, you can have parts that don't fully adhere. That is something you absolutely want to avoid because it'll be separate from the underlayer. When subsequently you put your color layer on and you do all your detailed design, it could eventually tear off. So you want to make sure to do all of the edge and then all of the sides and cover the entire lantern with an overlapping layer of white tissue paper. Keep your glue for the next phase, which is color, as well as your brush. So when you're done, make sure you rinse your brush off so the glue doesn't dry on the bristles. You want to set your lantern aside for another overnight so that tomorrow it'll be completely dry for you to do the color tissue paper.
This in some ways is the funnest part And it's also in many ways the most challenging part, because we're going to be applying color not with paint, but with tissue paper. The most important thing to think about through this whole process of coloring your lantern is to remember the light has to come through all the layers of paper that you put on the lantern. The first thing you want to do is have a color plan. So if you do have a sketch, it doesn't hurt to then maybe color in that sketch and start thinking about where you might want some of those colors to happen and what effects you might want to get. One very important color for the lantern is white. So the only way that you're going to get white on your lantern is to just leave it as it is, to not put anything over it. Every layer of color you're going to apply to your lantern is going to take away a little bit of the light. So what we're doing is we're working gradually, leaving the light areas and then building in the darks around them. Once I have my color plan, I'll take my lantern and I'll just sketch in some of the basic contours. Most importantly, I have my area where my lettering is going to go. I'm just going to make sure that that stays bright white. So we're going to pencil them in and then we're going to later go over them with black marker. But it's nice if they have a pure white background. So anything that you need to draw onto the lantern to make sure you have a reference point for applying color, you can do that. The pencil will really not show up in the final lantern. So this is a great way to give yourself a guideline so that you don't have kind of colors flying all over the place. So think of your image not just as the front and the back, but think of it as extending and wrapping around the whole lantern. Make that part of your color plan so that this sort of sandwich of light really becomes a true sculptural form once you've covered it with color. Get to know your color palette. So we've given you a palette of 13 colors plus white that for us have proven over many years of doing Morningside lights to be great colors, not just in and of themselves, but in combination with one another. So one of the things that I like to do when I first start out is I like to do a little chart of the colors I have. Now you might not want to go quite this far. Each one of these is single, double, and triple layer. I've got them all laid out so I have a reference point. It doesn't hurt to just take some of your extra scraps of Coroplast, told you they'd be useful, and lay out a couple of pieces of color and just see what they do together. When you double colors and triple colors, even the same colors, you get a really wide range of values and saturations from them. We have many different variables. A color that might look like a nice rusty orange at one layer becomes a deeper sunset orange at another, and a full-on red when you have 3 layers. But these colors also do a lot of things that are very unexpected. So there are combinations that you'll want to try. We have 13 colors to start with, but once you start combining them, the possibilities really are endless. I'm going to try a little bit of purple, a little bit of orange. Now, depending on what your image is, you may have different colors that you have in mind, or you might be looking for a color that we don't have. And you might discover through the magic of layering that that color is in fact obtainable. And a little bit of green and a little bit of island pink. So if you're not sure what they're going to do, experiment. So I've got my paper mache here. I've transferred it to a smaller container just to make it easier to work with. And we're using exactly the same technique, although there's no cheesecloth or white paper here, and then laying down a color. Now, one of my favorite examples of the unlikely mixing of colors is what happens with pink and green. The primaries of red, green, and blue behave a little bit differently from the primaries of paint. So normally if you combine red and green in paint, you get kind of a mud. Look what a beautiful color that is. That's not mud. That's a sort of a deep ochre yellow. That's the kind of unexpected combination that makes this whole process so much fun and so dynamic and interesting. You can just take a little while before you commit to doing things on the lantern, where erasing can be very difficult at this stage, and just see what you're going to get. and see all of those different combinations. So from 13 colors combined 2 or 3 layers with different colors, you get thousands and thousands of possibilities. But one thing to remember is that the more layers you add, the less light comes out of the lantern. Layer them to your heart's content, but always remember that with each layer, the lantern gets a little bit darker. So we start with big, wide, light and white areas, and then gradually add darker and darker colors. So now that we have a sense for what our color palette is, we have to talk about how we're actually going to work the paper, how we're going to cut it and shape it to the different areas on the lantern that we need. So we can give you a little bit of advice, but also know that there's no necessarily one right way to do this. And you'll discover a lot of things along the way. So the simplest one that probably everybody relates to is scissors. For example, if I have my slow sign that sticks out from the side, and I'm just going to lay this down, and I can actually see right through the paper. If I want to be really precise about this, I can lay this down, trace the line I want, and just cut it as needed. The result of that is that you get very clean edges that might be exactly what you want. The other great thing about scissors is that if you had a pattern, for example, a bunch of leaves, you can cut many different layers all at once. So you can take a whole sandwich of tissue paper and then cut the shape you want and then decorate with that. So that's always an option. And what I can do now is apply it to the lantern in exactly the same way that Sophia was applying the white paper. I'm going to lay down a complete and thorough layer of glue, lay this down, and then pull my finger out, and then I'm going to go back in and seal it down to the lantern surface. If I want to create an area that is a specific shape, but I want a softer edge, I can lay this down, and I'm just going to lay out this form like this. I'm making a very, very light line with the brush, and now I can just tug. All of the edges come loose, and now I can just glue that piece in. This is more like doing watercolors with large areas of color covering certain areas and then allowing them to interact with other colors. You might be just tearing off chunks of paper. Pull this paper along with the grain and get long, straight, nice ribbons from it. Now they're not going to be absolutely perfectly straight, but for lines, for example, the edges of the windows around the bus, and then we can use those to gradually fill in the various contours. So if you take a straight edge and you give it a good firm tug, you can get a nice, perfectly straight line that still has that soft deckled edge. Allow yourself the luxury of seeing what happens when you allow the colors to overlap a little bit. So I'm going to take a little strip here, and where I have this blue, I want to do like a pink line that's going to overlap it. So I'll just tear that. I'm going to let myself just overlap. I'm going to go right over the edge of that window of the van, paint that in, fold that over a little bit so I don't lose the triangle. Without even intending it, I have this beautiful purple line, this dark contour that really highlights the window. So invite those overlaps. Don't try to avoid them, but let the colors bleed over each other where there is a painterly layering of all these colors with the light coming through all of them together. I think we're just about done. Notice I've left the area here white for where our Shakespearean quote is going to go. And here we have also wrapped around the corner in a kind of vaguely cubist way, I would say. We didn't want this just to be a boring old windshield front, windshield side kind of thing, so we did sort of a wrap around there. And we have our speaker blasting out the chimes at midnight.
So now we're going to do the lettering for your quote. It's nice to take some time to write it out with your pencil. Inevitably, I use the eraser. I've just done that. So you want to take your marker, write out the letters, and make them, you can really darken them, you can thicken them a bit, you can add some serifs, really darken them because they'll read really well. So there we are. Ice cream truck the chimes at midnight. If you remember way back when you were putting those spacers, you put 2 at the bottom that were parallel and 2 at the top that were parallel. So here are my 2 top ones, and I'm gonna cut a little flap, and it cuts pretty easily, and the one long edge, and then that can just pop in. I'm gonna do the underside, find my spacers, and pop that in. 2 pieces of wire that are kind of coiled together. Open it up, put one aside, that'll be for the pole, and make like a little loop around my finger and turn it just maybe a couple times around, 2 or 3 times. And this is gonna stretch across, create like a little hanger. And we will need to poke the wire through the coroplast. We're gonna use our knife to do that. Find it easier to make a little mark in the back. I'm gonna make an incision just big enough for the wire to go through. And I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. Coil it around the central piece just a couple times and then bend it in so pokey bit of the wire is towards the coroplast, and do the same thing on the other side. Now with the other piece of wire, I'm gonna make a little hook for the end of the bamboo. So this wire I'm gonna fold in half and then in half again. And then I'm just gonna bend it to make an S or a Z. So then this hook, I'm gonna tape it onto the bamboo, and then I'm really kind of pulling against it so that the tape is quite tight around. So I'll just check to make sure that's all good. I'm gonna slide the bamboo through the bottom hole up to the top hole, slide the hook into this loop that I made. So now that we rigged the lantern, we'll put in the light. And you'll notice that the light has a little switch on one side, and we are gonna put it inside the lantern and tape it onto one of these spacers. But you wanna make sure that you orient the light so that you have access to the switch. I'm gonna take a length of tape, and I'm gonna sort of tape over the top and onto the sides and make sure I leave 2 flaps that I can then attach. And then I'm gonna very delicately slide it in there. And I'm pushing really hard on the tape. I'm kind of rubbing the tape down onto the coroplast spacer to make sure it holds. Should we see what it looks like?
Thank you so much for being part of this project. We can't tell you what an honor it is to have all of you put your time, your creativity, your effort, and even your voice into this amazing, growing, continuing community tradition. Do share your images with us of your work in progress. Send us a little video, some still images, whatever you can, so that we can see what you're working on and appreciate all of the amazing work that you're doing.
Come out and play on September 25th. Wherever you are, whatever street, whatever area you want to go out in, come out with your lantern and know that even though we're not physically in the same place, we will be out at 8 and many other people will be out in different parts of New York City and beyond with their lanterns. Send us an audio recording. We really want to hear your voice as well as see your lanterns in motion and also in progress.
We miss you. We hope we will see you next year live and in person when these workshops continue on the stage at Miller Theater. Best of luck with your creative endeavors, and maybe we'll see you out on the street on the 25th.